In the summer of 2025, the headlines read like a geopolitical realignment. According to Reuters, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum confirmed talks with Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, agreeing to strengthen trade ties. Together, they are accelerating a stunningly ambitious project, a $120 billion northern corridor designed to bypass the United States entirely. While they build new bridges of commerce back in the U.S., factory lines are halting for lack of parts, and consumer prices are surging. How did a plan to build an economic fortress end up with America's neighbors building a superhighway around it? To understand the sheer audacity of this new corridor, you have to understand the world it was designed to replace. For decades, North America operated as a single continental factory, with the United States as its undisputed central nervous system. Its veins and arteries were the highways of Texas, the railways of the Midwest, and the ports of California, through which nearly all continental commerce flowed. Under the architecture of NAFTA and later the USMCA, goods, parts, and capital moved effortlessly across borders. This wasn't just trade, it was a deeply integrated codependency. An electric motor built in Mexico and a battery pack assembled in Canada would meet on a GM assembly line in Michigan. It was a model of efficiency that powered shared prosperity. But that predictability began to fracture under the America First doctrine. The Trump administration reframed the relationship, viewing allies not as partners but as economic competitors. The constant threat of sudden unilateral tariffs created a chilling effect on investment. How could a company build a new factory in Mexico or expand a parts plant in Ontario if its access to the final market in the US could be severed by a single tweet? This instability forced a painful realization in Ottawa and Mexico City. Their structural dependency on the US as a transit hub was no longer just an inefficiency, it was a critical economic vulnerability. The United States, once the guarantor of the system, had become its single greatest source of risk. Trust, the invisible lubricant of this multi-trillion-dollar machine, was corroding. The quiet, behind-the-scenes conversations about reducing this dependency began. It was no longer a theoretical exercise. It was a matter of national economic survival. The simmering tensions of the past decade reached a boiling point in the summer of 2025. Facing a challenging political landscape and seeking a populist victory, the Trump administration escalated its trade rhetoric into a direct threat. The White House announced its intention to impose a new, broad-based tariff, reportedly between 1% and 8%, on all goods from Canada and Mexico, effective August 1st. The official justification was a familiar mix: closing trade deficits, protecting American jobs, and forcing allies to pay their fair share. The move was classic Trumpian statecraft: create a crisis, apply maximum pressure, and force partners to the negotiating table to extract concessions that could be framed as a political win. The administration was betting on a simple premise: the economic pain of the tariffs would be so great that Canada and Mexico would have no choice but to fold. They believed the U.S. held all the leverage. After all, the North American supply chain was a hub-and-spoke model, with the United States as the indispensable hub. For a Canadian auto parts manufacturer to get their product to a Mexican assembly plant, the most efficient route was almost always through the U.S. This transit dependency was a powerful tool. It generated billions in revenue for U.S. logistics companies and gave U.S. Customs and Border Protection oversight and control. The White House assumed this dependency was unbreakable. The response from Ottawa and Mexico City was swift, coordinated, and shockingly ambitious. Instead of engaging in a public spat with Washington, they turned towards each other. As confirmed by both the Associated Press and Reuters, President Sheinbaum and Prime Minister Carney held direct talks, emerging with a unified front. They jointly announced an acceleration of a project that had been rumored in logistics circles but was now thrust into the global spotlight: the Northern Corridor. This wasn't just a new highway. As detailed in publications like the Lodestar and Freight News, The Northern Corridor is a colossal $120 billion integrated trade route, a network of upgraded deepwater ports, dedicated freight rail lines, and advanced technology designed for the explicit purpose of moving goods between Canada and Mexico without ever touching U.S. soil or U.S. customs. The plan was audacious. It involved massive expansions of Pacific ports in both countries, allowing them to handle the world's largest container ships. From there, dedicated rail lines would move goods north and south, effectively creating a North American bypass. But the physical infrastructure was only half the story. The real genius of the corridor was its use of technology to create a frictionless digital border. By implementing a shared blockchain platform, customs data for shipments could be pre-cleared between Canadian and Mexican authorities while the goods were still at sea, eliminating the need for lengthy and unpredictable stops at the U.S. border. This wasn't just a reaction, it was a quiet revolution. While Washington was building tariff walls, its neighbors were building a virtual superhighway around them. The strategic pivot was immediate. As reported by Reuters, Canadian importers began to significantly cut back on purchases of U.S. agricultural goods, with exports in that sector dropping by 8.5% by mid-2025. More starkly, cross-border tourism from Canada into the U.S. plummeted by an estimated 70%, devastating the economies of border towns in states like Vermont and Michigan, which rely on Canadian shoppers. Canada was sending a clear, silent message. If America didn't want its goods, it wouldn't get its business either. This united front created an immediate and painful dilemma for the United States. The tariff threat, designed to bring its neighbors to heel, had instead pushed them into a powerful strategic alliance. The White House was now facing the consequences of its own actions on the domestic front. In the industrial Midwest, the first signs of a supply chain crisis began to appear. Auto plants, like the GM facility in Warren, Michigan, reported production slowdowns, citing shortages of critical components, including rare earth magnets essential for EV motors, which were now stuck in logistical limbo. Inflation, which had been moderating, ticked up from 2.4% to 2.7% as the cost of imported goods began to rise. The administration was caught in a trap. Following through with the tariffs would worsen inflation and cripple key industries like auto manufacturing, inflicting severe pain on American workers and consumers. But backing down would be a public admission of defeat, a signal that its strong-arm tactics had failed. The United States, accustomed to being the playground bully, suddenly found that the other kids had decided to go play in a different park altogether. For Canada and Mexico, the crisis became a catalyst for forging a new economic identity, one less defined by its relationship with the United States. The Northern Corridor project, a $120 billion investment in their shared future, became a powerful symbol of this pivot. It wasn't just about avoiding tariffs, it was about taking control of their own economic destiny. The 8.5% drop in U.S. agricultural imports into Canada wasn't just a statistic, it represented a strategic shift by Canadian grocers and food processors to source more from domestic producers or other international partners. The 70% collapse in cross-border tourism, while painful for U.S. border towns, reflected a conscious decision by Canadian consumers to spend their money at home or in other countries. This created a boom for domestic Canadian tourism and retail. For Mexico, the alliance with Canada offered a pathway to becoming a high-tech manufacturing powerhouse, focusing on producing clean steel, EV batteries, and auto components for a North American market that now had a new U.S.-free logistics channel. While the initial disruption caused uncertainty, the long-term vision was one of building a more resilient, integrated, and independent North American trade bloc, where the United States was just one partner among equals, not the sole gatekeeper. Back in the United States, the blowback from its own policies was severe and widespread. The most immediate impact was the dual crisis of inflation and shortages. The rise in the annual inflation rate to 2.7% was felt by every American family at the grocery store and the gas pump. But the pain was most acute in the industrial heartland. The production slowdowns at auto plants in Michigan and Ohio due to shortages of parts from Canada and Mexico sent a chill through the entire manufacturing sector, threatening thousands of high-paying union jobs. The economic analysis was grim. Projections from Freight News and the Lodestar suggested that the bypass corridor could cost the U.S. economy an estimated $245 billion over 5 years in lost logistics revenue, customs fees, and related employment. The GDP of the Midwest, the region most dependent on the integrated supply chain, was at risk of shrinking by as much as 2.8%. The policy designed to protect American jobs was now directly threatening them, while also making life more expensive for everyone. The United States was facing the painful reality that in a deeply integrated continental economy, you cannot build a wall around yourself without also walling yourself in. And so, North America stands at a crossroads it never anticipated. An attempt by the United States to use its central position as a weapon has backfired, prompting its closest allies to engineer a multi-billion-dollar workaround. Canada and Mexico, once beholden to American infrastructure, are now building a future where they control their own commercial destiny. The United States faces the prospect of becoming an island in its own continent, its economic leverage eroded by the very policies designed to enhance it. The map of North American trade has been permanently redrawn, not by cooperation, but by defiance. In the race to define the future, will North America win together, or will all three sides lose trying to go it alone? Are you American, Canadian, or Mexican? Share your story and your perspective in the comments below.